Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar regarding the Land Registry recent release of some ownership information. First of all, welcome. My name is Paul Davis. I'm the CTO at Nimbus Maps and the founder of Assured Property Group. First off, today I want to just let you sort of know who I am, what my experiences of the property industry and information and data such as this. Talk through what data has been made available by the Land Registry, how you can access it, what it looks like, what you can do with it, and then really at the same time we have a chat panel on the right hand side. So if anybody's got any kind of questions they'd like to ask me as we're going through, then please just pop them into the right hand side panel there, and we will do our best to pick those up either as we go along or at the end of the webinar. So, as I said, my name is Paul Davis. I'm the CTO at Nimbus Maps and the founder of Assured Property Group as well, which is a property professional services business specialising in agency work and development management work. And one of the founders says Nimbus Maps, which is a property information platform, which has been using this sort of data for between 2 and 5 years, actually, in various guises. Nimbus Maps got about 1,000 users as a free and a paid-for platform that kind of uses this data that's just been released, and hence kind of very excited about what the Land Registry is doing. So, moving on to exactly what data's been made available. If I just switch over screens here for a second, if you Google Land Registry ownership information, what you'll come through to is this particular website here. Now, in effect, what they've made available is two files which they've amalgamated into one, which is the old, in effect, the old commercial and corporate ownership data, which is this one, and the old overseas companies information as well. Now, what those two data files are, which are now one, are combined into that file, which shows any information, any titles that are owned by a commercial entity or an overseas company as well. So, in effect, as you go through this website and you scroll down, you'll be asked to tick a few boxes, say that you're going to use the data properly, and from there you'll be able to download a zip file. I'm going to assume that people don't know don't have huge IT skills. If that's a bit boring for people, then apologies, but we just want to make sure everybody can get access to this and understand what's going on. So in effect, the file that you download is this one. It's 240 megabytes in size, and it's a zip file. So all you would then do is click extract. I probably need to click it first. Extract all, and what you then end up with is this particular file here. Now, that file there is a comma-separated file. So as you see there, which is 1.2 gigabytes in size once it's been extracted. So it's quite a big file, and there's 3 million records in that particular file. The challenge with that size of file is that the file itself, so with 3 million records, Excel will display about 1 million records, which means that you can open a third of it in Excel, but the balance of the bottom 2/3 of the file won't open. When I was playing around with this file before the webinar, I did try to see whether something like Microsoft Access would open that file, and unfortunately, when that's put into a Microsoft Access database, Microsoft Access caps that at 2 gigabytes, which means that actually you can't open it in Access either. So what you're really unfortunately forced to do is to look at one of the sort of more powerful databases, something like Microsoft SQL or some of the free ones, things like MySQL. That will open these files very happily. So if you can get yourself familiar with those sorts of things, then all those sorts of databases, then you'll be able to get into this file. When you eventually get into it, what I've done here is just taken the top 40 or so out of the document, and just then wanted to run through the information that you get from it. So this is the kind of the raw file that you get your hands on. So in that file, what you have is the title number, and you have the tenure, which sits here. So whether it's freehold or leasehold, which is kind of quite interesting in its own right. You've got things like leasehold transactions in there. So kind of come on to how you might want to use that sort of information. The next The next field that's in there, or next column that's in there, is the property address. Now, one of the things you just need to be very careful with is as you go through that file, the property addressing has come from Ordnance Survey, so there is some IP that sits with Ordnance Survey. So if you're using this file for internal uses, that should be fine. If you're looking to pass that on or to sell it or do something clever with it like that, then you just need to be very careful that you speak to Ordnance Survey about that first. Otherwise, you might find that, well, there'll be licensing to deal with them. You need to sign a contract with them about how you're going to use that file and what you're going to do with it, and you're going to sell it to and pay them the royalties if they're due. So this does the file. What's also quite helpful is they've given the address in kind of some of the sort of the splits, so you can filter it by district or county or region, or indeed in most cases postcode, albeit you can see there are a few missing entries here. So what that would allow you to do is to say, well, actually, show me all the properties that are in Yorkshire and Humber or Greater London or whatever, and that would then allow you to sort of filter that file and see those entries. And obviously giving you on the left-hand side here the title number that sits with those. There's a multiple address indicator, which says actually there'll be more than one entry in this particular file for a particular property. And they've also very helpfully put in the price paid data. So some of you may be familiar with this. The residential price paid data has been out for a while, and within that there are actually some commercial properties in that file, categorized under an O categorization rather than the semi-detached or flats or whatever in those files, and those entries then do come through on this particular file. What you'll see is that's not particularly complete, and the reason for that is that obviously this is commercial ownership properties, and so if it's in private ownership, which a lot of obviously houses are, then the entries from the price paid data is not in this file obviously for those properties, but where the property is in commercial ownership, then you see that in the file here, which is helpful, I think. What you then have next is where we start getting into the juicy stuff that we've kind of all excited about. The next column there is the proprietor name, so that's the business or the company that owns that property. Now, typically that includes things like councils. It includes, once you see there's a district council in that list there, but in effect, limited companies and all the rest of it. And obviously within that, you can search and filter and play around with that. The next column is the company registration number. Now, I would just hazard a little caution on that information as well. So what we've tended to find as we've been using this data over the course of the last 5 years or so is that company registration number sometimes is correct and sometimes isn't correct. What typically happens is that as a record is updated by the Land Registry, if it's gone from one company to another, or if sometimes they certainly capture the proprietor name to be accurate, but sometimes that company registration number isn't accurate. And so just be careful if you're trying to link that back to things like company's house information or something like that, then that isn't always accurate, and actually you probably just need to work off the company name instead. As we go through that file again, this is rather unlike Blue Peter, I haven't done one here made earlier. You have the list then of the types of businesses. So if you want to start to play around with this particular data, where you start saying, well, show me all the properties that are owned by a county council or something in Greater London, and that's available in this particular file. So you can see the types of companies, types of organisations that are on in this particular field here, and then from that obviously add other filters into that particular file. Again, moving through this file, what you then have is the company's address. Now, again, what I would just do is hazard a little word of caution around that particular column. The way that is captured again is that it's when the property is the change of ownership is registered, is when that field is updated. So, in the case of properties that have been bought recently, obviously that's usually pretty accurate. But if a property's been held for a while, then sometimes you'll see that data hasn't been updated, and actually, well, it doesn't get updated. So unless the property's changed hands, it's the property address, so that the proprietary address is accurate as at the date that particular business bought that property. And that then continues in terms of whether there's further addressing information, and then moving through to that's what these couple of fields are here. So if there's more than one address for a particular business, and then moving forward, if there's say a second owner, so if there are two owners that own something sort of jointly on a joint venture basis, then you'll see. So, for example, down here, this particular property is owned by two companies, LSAV, Aston Student Village, GP1 Limited, and it seems GP2 Limited at the same time. So that kind of just shows you if there's certain properties owned in joint ownership. And obviously, if you're looking to get a complete ownership and a complete understanding of everything a company owns, you really need to be filtering across each of those different those proprietor columns, if you like. Whether they're the first or the second in the register, in effect. And that information goes through, and there are potentially up to four companies that might own a particular property, and hence you see that information kind of across the top here, going through a number of times. So that's what's in that part of the file, and then hopefully towards the end here you have this field which is the date the proprietor was added, which is up here. And in effect, there you can see the date at which these properties were then added to the Land Registry, and the date at which that change of ownership was captured by the Land Registry. Now that may be the date obviously it was bought, or it may be a date close to that. As you know, the press lawyers have taken a little while to send their forms in to get things registered. And that really then is the information that you see in that particular file. So hopefully we have an idea of what's in the file, what's been made available, and how you get hold of it. And I suppose the next bit I just wanted to kind of have a chat about really was, or talk through rather, was kind of what you could do with this. And what we found, typically our users in Nimbus Maps have kind of wanted to use it for is two things really. One is looking at what does a particular business own. So maybe I have a client or I have a particular company I want to go and target, and just getting a feel for what that particular business owns geographically, and kind of trying to understand what their estate might look like. Well, secondly, there's sort of a second user case, which is maybe I've got a potential occupier or a tenant or something like that. Someone perhaps going to buy a piece of land off me or something like that, and actually wanted to understand what those guys have been up to previously, or what those businesses have been up to previously, the kind of values they've been paying, and trying to get an understanding of what's been going on in the background. And this file kind of gives a lot of information around that. So some of the ideas around that then, if we sort of look at the proprietor name, one of the companies that we know well. So in the case of this particular file, you can obviously do some text filters, which is what I'm doing here, typing in a particular business name, and obviously where that text is found in that name, I can obviously filter by it. So obviously from that, I can then get a title number, and I can do my usual trick of jumping around through Land Registry, and from there jump through and search property ownership in the usual way. And I've got my detailed inquiry, and then put my title number into there for search, and obviously from there I can go and buy those, buy that title plan and register and things like that. What we found though is that one of the reasons for creating our web platform was that that's kind of interesting, but we'd like to see that on a map, and we'd like to understand that in more detail. So hence we've created this particular platform. I'm actually in the paid for version, but there is a free version which will give you this same functionality in terms of being able to pop a title number into it, and then being able to sort of browse around it and understand it. So that free version of Nimbus Maps gives you all this information that you'll see on the left hand side. So in effect, what you can then do, so having looked at that particular title, obviously I know who owns it from that file, or indeed from Nimbus Maps. On the left hand side here we can see that title number. All the properties have been pre-measured, but you can see down here that that's the particular company that owns it. What we've traditionally found though is that companies have subsidiary companies, and those subsidiary companies aren't always named the same as the parent company. So in our paid for platform, what we've done is we've actually created a way of linking that back through. So in effect to the overall group structure in effect. So if I double click that, what you can see is that by typing in that business name, actually what I want to understand is what that entire group owns, and hence we've created a company search that then allows us to understand the subsidiaries as well. So what you can see is that IM Properties Birmingham, no prizes for guessing, is part of the IM group, but they actually own some subsidiaries, things like Spitfire Properties and Hazley Business Centre and things like that. And then what that allows you to do then is to plot that ownership across the whole of the UK, and you can then zoom in at which particular properties are where, and have a look at some further information around those properties. So one of the properties on my list was this particular one, and obviously in that free version of Nimbus Maps, you can then browse and see what that's, who owns that property, but then have a search around, and there's a sort of a search here function that allows you to then see the ownership around that particular property. So this is then a search around that property, showing the freeholds in edged in red. Everything starts with the red line around a plan, and then these little green pins show that there's a lease that's being granted in effect. So what this is doing in effect is looking through that same file that the Land Registry have just released, but allowing you to kind of visualize how that works on the ground without having to go back through to the Land Registry and sort of going through that and paying £3 each time. So again, this is entirely free. That's the really the information that the Land Registry have released, and in effect that's this information down here. Again, in the free platform, what you can then do from the platform is then link through and see that particular business and understand then their up-to-date address, which is obviously that information there, which may or may not be the same as was in that original file. So if I just jump back to here, hopefully in this case they're the same, but we'll see. So I am House, South Drive, Coleshill, but in effect you can double check that is still their current address, because obviously that information is registered when they filed their last set of accounts, and those accounts were made up until the 31st of December 2000, so that's when the next set of accounts is, but the last set of accounts was December 2016. So the last date was June 17, and therefore we know that the registered address is still there, and hence if you want to write to them or something like that, then obviously you have that information there. In addition to that, obviously if you want to speak to somebody about a particular property, then you have some names of people that you can get in touch with. So really, as I say, what hopefully we've covered off today is that we've covered off what data's been made available, how you can get your hands on it, how you can open it. As I say, the way to open that data is through a database such as Microsoft SQL, or indeed some of the open source free versions of things like MySQL, albeit you need to just understand how to extract the information through writing a little bit of code, which is relatively straightforward thing to do. If you need help with that, that's kind of stuff we can help with if needs be. So hopefully that's kind of clear. Hopefully you've been able to see what the data looks like, and then hopefully understand what's in that data. Obviously a couple of notes in terms of the licensing for the Ordnance Survey data, if you're going to use that commercially or part. And then hopefully just talk through a couple of ways in which you can make the most out of that data, whether that's using the Land Registry file here, or indeed if you want to use Nimbus Maps Essentials, we'd be delighted to have you on that platform. So that's entirely free. There's a paid for version that gives you a whole host of extra functionality, things like planning information on a particular property, or building footprints and rate assessments and things like that, which allow you to understand what's in a particular building and things like that. But hopefully that's given a clear understanding of, say, all of the fuss has been about, and what you can do with it.